Yes, he did.
You don't know what fair is. You can't make it.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Thanks for joining us for another edition. Good to have you with us as we have lots to talk about on this edition of Donnybrook. But first, let's meet the panelists, starting with Wendy Wiese from the Big 550 KTRS, Bill McClellan from your St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Ray Hartmann from rawstory.com and the Riverfront Times, and from the St. Louis American, Alvin Reid. Second half of this program, we call it Next Up. We talk to local newsmakers and leaders, and we'll talk to Les Sturman, chairman of the Citizens for Greater Downtown St. Louis. The topic, crime. And that brings us to our first topic tonight, Ray. Very, very sad, tragic story where a reckless driver plowed into an automobile which pinned a teenager from Tennessee visiting downtown St. Louis this past weekend. As a result of this accident, the teen lost both her legs to amputation. The driver had been out on bond. Turns out, according to reports, Christine Byers of KSDK says he violated his GPS monitoring device regulations 90 times, 9-0. He was brought to trial for armed robbery last summer, but the Circuit Attorney's Office, saying that the witness was dead, decided to drop the trial and refile charges. Turns out the witness was not dead, was quite alive. People say this is incompetence on the part of the Circuit Attorney's Office, Kim Gardner. And now the leader of the Senate, Greater St. Louis Inc., the mayor, and others are complaining and I guess targeting her with criticism. But the Attorney General for the state is filing a writ of quo warranto, which basically would remove her from office. Where do you stand? Should Kim Gardner, who defended herself today in a press conference, resign?
No, I think that to say this is a tragedy is an understatement for not only obviously for the family and all of us as parents and those that have kids still, in my case, that travel to these kinds of things. It's hard to even, and obviously the impact on, say, one more kick to St. Louis's image. I do not think, when you look at all the facts of this, that this was Kim Gardner's fault. Okay, that's my view of it. I happen to know the judge involved, who was part of this, who was a very good guy, and it's a horrible outcome. It's certainly emblematic of a larger problem we have in St. Louis, which is our traffic in the city is just out of control. I mean, it's just the Wild West, and the fact that this happened is embarrassing. It's tragic. It's horrible. I do not think it's about this is Kim Gardner's fault. I think when you look at all the facts, that's simply the case. There's obviously, Bill wrote a great column today. There are very reasonable people that feel differently than I do about Kim Gardner, but I don't think that, I think as much emotion as there is in this, I understand it. I do not think this is reason for her. I've got my own, I don't want to keep going on. I got plenty of problems with the AG, but that's separate.
Yeah, I do think it's Kim Gardner's fault, and I think that it's an office in such disarray and dysfunction that this sort of thing happens all the time, judges tell me. You know, the prosecuting attorney either doesn't show up or, like in this case, showed up and said, you know, I've just come back from my honeymoon, I'm not ready to proceed. In a functioning office, somebody else either steps in and takes the case, or the prosecutor calls the victim ahead of time and says, hey, there's a scheduling problem. This thing that the victim shows up, and then the prosecuting attorney says, well, we're not ready to go. And then to claim that, well, we didn't take care of this because the victim was dead, and say, no, the victim wasn't dead. And then it turns out, oh, well, somebody with the same first name died. So we got confused. It's just, it's the new normal, and it doesn't work. It's a dysfunctional office, and you can't have a functioning city that doesn't have a functioning criminal justice system.
Do you think that the judge who released her is no. And again,
Right.
do you think
From what's been released this afternoon, Ray, is the judge released the transcripts of the
Proceedings.
hearing in which the circuit attorney originally said, that the judge made this decision. That the transcripts show that when it came time about bond, the circuit attorney's office was fine with, letting him go. So yes, I don't think this is the judge's fault.
And I'm not saying it is.
And like I say, the fact that there was this horrific accident, okay, that's on the driver. But the fact that this guy was on the street, that's on Kim Gardner. And my point is, I wish we were back in the days of strong party bosses where people could go to Kim Gardner and say, you have to resign. Just like I wish the Republicans could have done that to Trump. And instead of having January 6th, just say, you lost, you're done. And I was heartened that Mayor Tashara Jones at least, stood up and said that she should at least consider resigning because she's lost the trust of the people. And I think she should resign.
Ultimately, I think it will come down to the people that elected her. And I guess Missouri Prosecutors Association released a statement this morning saying that there are ways that this can be done. The state needs to stand down, and the Attorney General and all that. I think that is partially grandstanding. But let's take the names out of it. If I lived someplace and a situation like this happened, and then we learned that the person who committed this crime had violated their GPS, 90 times and had a record and on, somebody would have to answer to that I think in any community I have lived in my life.
That's right.
It's inexcusable. And it cannot be just, it was this person or that or whatever. No. The first thing that has to be said by whoever this prosecutor is, I messed up. My office messed up. This will never happen again. And not a press conference where you have people yelling and screaming in the background and all that. You just accept the responsibility of what happened, and whatever you're going to do, probably not resign. I'm not really calling on her to resign. I'm calling for her to face up to this and to do her job. And if she were to be removed from office, I don't think any of us could say, like, she didn't have that coming. All right? I don't think she should resign. But at the same time, I think the initial statement that she made and released was just so, as
Tone deaf.
state,
Tone
yeah,
deaf.
the Aldrich, state rep Aldrich said it was just so tone deaf. And I think that created even more of a firestorm.
Well, and the Post has done some really incredible reporting with a really fluid situation, and so has the Riverfront Times and obviously the American. But McGraw-Millhaven had Bob McCullough on today, and he made the point that two things are never a surprise: a court date and a wedding date. That this is just part and parcel of the chaos, the staffing levels being so far below what they should be at the Circuit Attorney's Office, driving all of the experienced prosecutors out of the office. This is, this is chaos. And I was reminded of what Mayor Bosley used to say back in the 90s. He said that progress is neither black nor white, it's green. And I think what we're really getting into here is we are in the red zone. I mean, people are canceling vacation plans. This young woman was from the heart of Cardinal Nation, if you will. It's not just the St. Louis region. It's not just Southern Illinois. It's Tennessee, it's Mississippi, it's Kentucky, it's Indiana. And when you hear a story like this, if I'm the Cardinals, maybe I made a call to the mayor's office. Who knows? But if you're the circuit attorney and if you don't do your job for whatever reason, people are going to get killed or they're going to be injured.
For the sake of argument, I want to bring up a couple of points that might actually work in the circuit attorney's favor, even though I think she's been a terrible circuit attorney. One is there doesn't seem to be any firm understanding among lawyers I talked to today as to whether her contention that she made verbal overtures, requests to the judge, and that was legitimate, that she could ask verbally.
She said
not
in the
written.
city of St. Louis.
In the city, in 22nd Judicial Circuit.
Right.
Some lawyers say that that's okay, that that does happen. And if that does happen, maybe she did talk, or one of her representatives, to the judge verbally and was never recorded, like the transcript you saw.
I would say that I don't think that she has earned the benefit of the doubt.
I agree.
Where the judge said, didn't happen, and she said, it did. And you said, well, you got to believe somebody. I don't think that Kim Gardner has earned the benefit of the doubt. And also, there's this thing about her not resigning. You know, I'm with the Prosecutors Association for the state. I don't think the state should come in and take over the city office of St. Louis or any county. But the Republicans are going to do it. And if Kim Gardner doesn't resign, we're going to have a situation where it's going to be complete mayhem. Her supporters will be out on the streets. We're going to have trying to impose a outside prosecutor. It's going to be a complete mess where the situation could be removed if Tashara Jones and some of the other Democrats were able to convince Kim Gardner that for the sake of the city, you got to step down.
I'm fairly confident.
I don't think she'll ever do that.
I do not think she will.
Oh, me either.
And I understand the concerns here. I'm not going to quarrel with. And there's no question that there's a lot of things that are not great about that office, and particularly in terms of its management. But I will say this: that I don't care who you bring in to replace Kim Gardner, it's not going to move the needle a millimeter on our crime problem, and we should be focusing on that.
Oh, I think it would move it a millimeter.
Right,
I think it
understand.
would.
I don't
You
feel
can't
maybe
defend
two.
incompetence by saying
No.
that it'll
I'm
never
not
get any better.
First of all, I'm not defending it. I'm just
I thought you
saying
were.
that I'm not.
Okay.
I'm saying that we need to have that what has to be addressed, among other things in the city, are like the fact that traffic, which I think involves people other than the circuit attorney, the police and others, is out of control. And the tragedy, we say, well, if this guy had been off the street, I don't know, the way traffic is out of control, and I'm not exonerating this guy, but the point is, we have a problem. It's amazing
then
we don't
need
have
more
more.
police, Ray.
Well, maybe.
Don't forget,
or
Ray.
maybe they need to do a better
They're
job.
not
When the
prosecuted.
Highway Patrol under
Right.
former Governor Greitens
Right.
was on highways 44, 55, 70, and 64, they generated 3,000 tickets, which she tore up.
That's right.
So who's responsible for the mayhem that's on the highways?
Well,
Well,
I
that's a
honestly,
different
just
issue.
one thing real quick, but one, first, I don't think this is a traffic problem. I think this is a criminal problem, all right?
Both.
And then two, as someone said to me yesterday, he said, hey, it makes you wonder who else is out there. And there's
Exactly.
there was nothing I could say to that because we don't know.
How many other Rileys?
It was a
should
traffic
be
accident.
Daniel
okay?
Riley should be. How many other Daniel Rileys out there are there who should be having their GPS monitored, who are possibly another
Well, there's a
tragedy?
lot of them
How
because
many
we've
people
seen that.
are getting acquitted because
Yeah.
we have an inexperienced staff at the Circuit Attorney's office. The professionals were run out of town. I mean, the guy who took out my window, the glazier, Larry Keck, old, younger than me, but an old fella. He was murdered, man arrested, and acquitted. I mean, it's the new normal in St. Louis.
I think, Ray, though, that you're right. I think that it is a traffic problem. You recall a couple years ago, your newspaper reported that, those guys on motorcycles who do tricks, they converge on St. Louis on an annual basis in September because the word is traffic laws are not enforced.
Right, and this was a traffic accident. I'm not saying the guy was a good guy or that he wasn't a criminal or whatever, but the fact is she was not, this person who was victimized was not victimized as part of an armed robbery. She was victimized as part of our crazy, out-of-control traffic problem.
It's
But
a
he
crime.
wouldn't have been in the car, Ray.
It's really not a traffic
It
problem.
was a traffic accident.
This is not.
I'm sorry.
This is not a traffic accident.
No.
I'm sorry. I mean, I just don't look at it like
well,
that.
what did you?
This was an armed robber that should have been
Somebody
in
who
jail
should
driving
have been in
crazy.
jail.
Of course, there was somebody
I-
should
I
have been in
can't put
jail,
that-
but it's
I
not
can't
about
put
the fact
that-
that it was. I'm sorry, there
I'm
were
sorry, I
vehicles
can't-
involved.
Yeah, but don't forget, Alvin, when we talked to Chief Dennis Jenkerson. He was describing how the cars are hitting their ambulances and knocking them over. It's
And
so
they're not
crazy
all
in
armed
St. Louis.
robbers that do it. That's my point.
I have a real problem using the term car
Right.
accident.
It was
traffic
With this.
accident.
That's what it
No.
was. I'm not saying, I'm not minimizing it, but that's what it
90
was.
GPS violations. It just doesn't, a traffic accident doesn't, you know, whether,
Okay.
doesn't
This is what
rise to
happened.
that
We're
level.
going to talk to Les Sturman of the Citizens for a Greater Downtown St. Louis on Next Up, and he'll tell us how many officers are actually patrolling downtown St. Louis when it comes to traffic. He's taking a look at that. Probably in the interest of time, we should move on. Alvin Reid, I want to ask you about St. Louis County. It has a 50-year-old headquarters, the Lawrence Roos building, I think, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. And it's got some real problems with its fire safety. It's, to repair the fire safety apparatus, they're going to have to spend $200 million, something like that. So they're looking at alternatives, and already they've spent, the county has, $2 million on one planning study. According to one story in this week's Post-Dispatch, they're going to spend another $5 million for planning. Any problems with that?
Well, the first two, I understand, okay? Because, you know, internally and what's going on inside the structure of a building, I'm, you know, I need my engineer daughter to step in. But they could tell you really that, you know, like, no, this has to happen. And this is dangerous fire safety wise. So I don't have a problem with the two. After that, then you got to negotiate that next 5, because that's 5 that could be going to the whatever it is that you're going to fix in the building. So no, the county, especially if it's a public facility where people are coming to, you know, pay their taxes and do their business, it needs to be ultimately safe, very safe. And whatever you need to spend to do that, I don't have.
Yeah, wouldn't you think the first $2 million would have covered all the study you need? I mean, this idea that, well, our conclusions are you either need a new building or you got to fix this one or maybe lease someplace. You know, we want a deeper dive than that for $2 million bucks. You know?
Right.
Maybe
right.
that's the price of
Well, and I keep thinking, I mean, does inflation apply here? Because I go into sticker shock when I see the price of eggs or anything else at the grocery store. So does the same thing, honestly, does the same thing follow? Because I agree with everybody, you know, you want a safe county government center, but at the same time, $7 million in studies.
I will say, I was questioning it, and then I saw that the employee in charge of it is Stephanie Leon Streeter, who I've known for a while, and I think she's a real straight arrow. She's very conservative, very prudent, and I don't know anything about construction, as you all know, but if she says
But if Stephanie
that money's
says-
lost, honestly, I think that she's a great public servant.
And I think also it's because it's a public building, we're scrutinizing more. I'm sure at some point the Empire State Building needed to upgrade, and the study they did to fix their fire safety hazards probably cost $12 million.
Yeah.
And so I think it's one reason you're looking at it like, oh, this is public money, and that building looks fine to me. I'm like, well, okay, I don't work in there.
Bill McClellan, excuse me, I'm sorry, Bill.
McClellan.
I'll get your name right one of these days.
Like the
You
general.
haven't known each other very long.
I want to ask you about Sheriff Vernon Betts, who was caught on tape by the Riverfront Times and an attorney, Gerald Christmas. He was talking about an employee. He was using the N-word and other words you wouldn't use in polite company. Some people get fired for that. But he also was complaining that one of his employees would not campaign for him, wouldn't put up a yard sign. And I think that employees should be protected from political influence like that. Don't you?
No, I'm a little more old-fashioned than you. I'm not defending anybody using terrible language toward anybody else, especially an employee or an employer. But the sheriff's office is the last patronage office in the city.
Right.
And by gosh, you know, I grew up in Chicago, and well, my father lost his job with the Park District and was moved to streetlights because my grandmother's sister moved in and registered as a Republican. And the local honchos told my dad, Art, there's nothing we can do. You got a Republican living in your house.
Unbelievable.
So I would think that if in the patronage office, if the sheriff says, here's a yard sign, Bill, I mean, I wouldn't say, I'm not putting this up. I mean, I might lean it against the fence or something, but...
Well, I have an alternative view. I think that the employees should be hired because they're competent, they work hard, they show up early, not because they support the sheriff and the... in November.
Well, I think I'm always hearkening back to something that Bill has said repeatedly, not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And Sheriff Betts I think he is a fine public servant. I think that he has a terrific legacy. If he has a moment, we all have moments. I mean, truly, I wouldn't want to see anything. If he, gets a slap on the wrist, that's fine, but nothing more.
It appears that all city officers are not treated equally here. Wow. I think that
Big difference.
Yeah, huge, actually.
Big difference,
Apples,
right?
oranges,
I
bananas.
get it. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Let's just put it this way. I've met Sheriff Betts. He's a delightful man.
Yes, he is.
I think he's absolutely in the wrong in this. And that, it kind of does goes to show you big difference. It's what you think of the person involved. And in this case, my God, if this was Kim Gardner's office doing
You
this,
have got to
we'd
be
have an
kidding me.
entirely different. No, I'm not talking about if this happened in Kim Gardner's office, we'd be having a whole different argument.
Do you
And
know
so,
what has happened? What has actually happened?
I'm
in
not.
Kim Gardner's
I'm talking
office,
about
right?
this. If this happened, that you're all
God.
saying, "Oh, it's all the old boys thing." If this happened in her office, if she called somebody these names, and did
this would be the
this would be a
least-
different. All I'm saying is it would be
This
a
would be
different
the
discussion.
least of the
I think the
accusations.
language-
Different discussion. It would be
Certain
a different
officials would have
discussion.
gotten fired for using that language, and
would have been
one
a different discussion.
school board member in Rockwoods, Jessica Clark, was censured because she used
I like
language
the
that
man,
was
but I think he was in the wrong, and I stand by my point.
Okay, just a little secret here. Black people use that term when they're
That's
referring to each other, and to me, I don't have a problem with that. It's not. You can't say that to me, you all, and
Right.
not, but somebody could, and whatever. Two, the fact that somebody got cussed out on the phone or whatever. I'm like you. That's how business used
Yeah,
to get done.
yeah.
Right.
I wish that was the only
However,
problem we
you
have with
can't-
the Circuit
you can't
Attorney's
tell one
office.
of your employees that you better put a sign up.
That's what I'm talking.
That's wrong.
I didn't say
That's
anything about his language. I'm
Okay.
talking about the sign.
But
Okay.
but that's
But
trivial.
that's
That's
slap on the wrist stuff
Well,
compared
I
to
don't
other.
think it's trivial.
Oh, wow.
I
Wendy,
don't
I wanna,
think the sign thing is trivial. I agree with you about the language.
I don't
care.
think employees should be pressured.
But
But, Wendy, I want to ask you about students.
employers are pressured every day. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I hope not. As shop steward at our local, we wouldn't have permitted that. Let me ask you this. City of St. Louis, along with Ferguson, Florissant, Clayton, and some other school districts have seen drops in enrollment 10% or more. And in fact, you take a look at the city and the county and St. Charles, they're losing kids who are going to public schools. People are scratching their heads and saying, where are the kids? Some of them are homeschooled, obviously, but not all of them. 20,000 kids in the state are missing from pre-pandemic, and 2 out of 3 of those are from the city or the county.
8,000, I think, total between the city and the county.
So a third,
Yeah,
okay.
8,000 kids are just not there. And because of Missouri's kindergarten optional type thing, the numbers could be even higher than that. Hundreds of thousands of kids have disappeared nationally, according to the Associated Press, and I think Stanford did a study on it as well. I'm as confused as anybody else. I mean, it's alarming because, what sort of impact is that going to have on school funding, on staffing issues? But even more importantly, where have all of these people, and not just school-aged children, all of the people who were here before the pandemic? And, a lot of folks just sort of slough it off and say, oh, well, they took early retirement. Not that many people took early retirement. We can't staff the jobs that are open.
Excuse me, and I second that.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer. I was astonished like everybody else, but I have a question, and I wonder how much of it might be related to the war on public education that is ongoing across our country. I don't have the answer. I think that's a fair question because there is a war on education, public education, and I don't know if that's impacted
But I mean,
or not.
kids still have to go to school.
Well,
and there
but
has
public-
there's not been a huge influx into, obviously, to Catholic schools and also private schools.
I don't know. I
mean,
say, I just don't know if that.
Private
Yeah.
schools are closing just as fast as so.
I just asked if
I
that's
have
part of
no
it.
Well, we
idea.
know in the city, 1 out of 5 kids moved out between 2010 and 2020.
But where did they
So
move
there's
to?
that. Well, the county.
All right,
or
but then
St. Charles.
how come
Then
the
how could
county
the
isn't
county
having
be-
an increased
Yeah, the
enrollment?
county's-
That's the mystery about
Yeah,
it.
the county's down too. I mean, 5,000.
And I
I
just
think
asked
you-
the question. Maybe it's population trends. I don't know. I
Now,
think it's a good
in-
question.
I do
It's
think
got to
in
have. There's got to be some
Kirkwood,
answer.
The lower grades, like the kindergarten, kind of preschool, I think that's up. So, I mean, now whether these people end up moving away or whatever, but I think it's trending up for the future, but not to the level that, you know, it would return to where it was when, you know, I graduated and my sister, 525 people in a class. I think those days are over.
Exactly.
But Kirkwood, like Clayton,
Yes, and lost.
is withdrawing from the voluntary student transfer
Yes,
program.
yes.
So there's that as well.
Yes, and I don't know. That number of students that were in Kirkwood and Clayton just was nowhere near as many as it used to be.
Alvin, 30 seconds. Do the Battlehawks start tonight, or do they have a game tonight?
The Battlehawks play tonight after we're off, so watch our entire show before switching over to whatever network they're on. 30,000 tickets have apparently been sold for the home opener, which is a couple of Saturdays from now. Once again, it sounds like we're going to be the shining star of the XFL. Now, whether we put that on our national commercial or not, Bill, but
The only thing I'm going to disagree with you, Alvin, is I don't think people should change the channel at 8 o'clock.
There you go.
Oh!
Caw-caw. Okay, let's go to the old mailbag.
Scaffold there.
Yeah. I'm outraged. The state of Missouri will prevent a kid from finding Huckleberry Finn in his library, but if he wants to carry a firearm down the street in broad daylight, let it be. That from Lori McGinley of St. Charles. It was such a pleasure to watch the show this evening, February 9th. No one was talking over the other participants. Charlie Brennan needs to remember that his role is as the provocateur, not the main voice. Alvin Reid leads the discussion much more pleasantly. Thank you, Virginia McDonald. And we heard from Bill Kellenberger of St. Louis. Every day in the news, we see more catalytic converter thefts. Why can't they clamp down on the buyers and put a stop to those thefts? Share with us your views. Care of 9PBS 63108. We love those emails. Donnybrook at 9pbs.org. And those tweets. Use hashtag DonnybrookSTL. Call the 9 line 314-512-9094 and listen to us on your favorite podcast source. Apple, Spotify, Google Play, and TuneIn. That completes the first half, but stay tuned because Wendy and I will talk to Les Sturman from the Citizens for a Greater Downtown St. Louis. That's on Next Up, next.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.